Hey guys, what's up? It's Charlie here, and today we're going to be looking at the US government's mysterious secret airline. But before we take off, why not subscribe and press the notification bell too? I'm sure we're all familiar with the concept of airplane call signs. Every airplane has their own call sign. Sometimes these call signs can simply be the name of the airline. For example, United Airlines or EasyJet. And some airlines even have special call signs. For example, British Airways has Speedbird. But there's one call sign that puzzles everyone, even airplane aficionados. And that call sign is simply Janet. This is a call sign for an airline which isn't really an official airline. All of the airplanes have absolutely no logos and the planes hide in plain sight. If you've ever been to Las Vegas's McCarran International Airport, chances are you've seen these planes. Anyone can see them sitting in a hotel room, driving by, or flying over the airport. But Janet is not an airline that you can simply book a ticket on. You see, this airline exists for one reason: to ferry around the most secret government employees in the USA. Officially, the call sign Janet is an acronym for Joint Air Network for Employee Transportation. But many say the true meaning is just another non-existent terminal. This is pretty typical for the US military, as they're often quite cryptic and comedic. They have a fleet of around half a dozen Boeing 737-600s, and they also have a few Beechcraft 1900s and King Airs. All of these are in a highly secure compound in a very simple terminal, and this terminal is at Las Vegas's McCarran International Airport. Every morning, the parking lot outside the terminal fills up with hundreds of cars. The planes then take off, and then in the evening they come back. And after that, all of the cars drive away. So how do we know that this airport is owned by the US government? Well, if you look up the registration of any of these planes, it will say the owner is the Department of the Air Force. However, the US Air Force actually don't operate these flights. That is not listed, but we do actually know who operates this airline. This airline used to be operated by a company named EG&G. This is a highly secret defense contractor for the USA. But in 1999, EG&G was bought by the Carlyle Group, another big defense contractor. But then a few years later, in 2002, the USR Corporation bought that. But then that was acquired by AECOM in 2014. AECOM is one of the most secretive and largest defense contractors in the USA. So as far as we know, this billion-dollar company named AECOM operates Janet Airlines. But where do these planes go, and who are the thousands of people that travel on them every single day? Well, we can actually track these planes up to a point. They take off from the Los Angeles airport, and then after about 20 minutes, they turn off their transponder. Most airplanes are not allowed to do this, but seeing as they're going to secret locations, they are allowed to. However, we can infer where these planes land based on where their transponders are turned off. Their transponders turn off here, and Area 51 is right here. This is very mysterious, as according to the US government, Area 51 does not exist. But obviously from satellite images, we know it does. So it seems every morning, thousands of Area 51 employees get on these airlines and then fly to Area 51. Basically, it's just a quick way for them to commute into the desert. After all, you couldn't drive out there every single day. Janet Airlines are actually the only airplanes designated to fly into this area. This airspace is known as Restricted Airspace 4808 North. If a regular plane flew into this area, they'd be met by F-15 fighter jets and then shot down. But Janet Airlines fly into this airspace many times a day without any issues. So based on where their transponder drops off, we can tell these planes are going to Area 51. But one flight path from this airline that doesn't turn off its transponder goes all the way down to Texas. That's right, the planes take off from Los Angeles Airport and go all the way down to Tonopah Test Range. This is yet another top secret military base. However, instead of Nevada where Area 51 is, this one is in Texas. However, Tonopah Test Range is not as secretive as Area 51, which is probably why they don't turn off their transponder for these flights. This is where the US military tests out many of its planes and weapons. Other air bases where these planes are flown to include Plant 42. This is the site where US Air Force planes are actually built. Some flights also go to another military base named China Lake, and they also go to another classified military base named Edwards Air Force Base. So this secretive airline is pretty much transporting all of the people who work at places like Area 51 every day. But you're probably wondering, how can I get onto one of these airplanes without actually applying for a job and working at Area 51? Well, in 2018, AECOM, the people who operate Janet, actually posted a job application. This job application was for flight attendants for Janet Airlines. The job description said you need to remain calm in stressful situations and deal with tricky customers and long hours in the sky. To get this job, you need top secret government security clearance. But AECOM have since taken down this job listing, so we can only assume they found a flight attendant. But keep your eyes peeled on their careers website, and you never know, you could try and work at Janet Airlines. Also, if you ever take a flight from Las Vegas's McCarran International Airport, look out for planes with no branding. Janet flights all have one red strip and no other branding at all. They do this simply to hide in plain sight, but now you know what to look out for. Look out the US government's secret end-of-the-world airplane. So first off, what is this secret plane you likely have not heard anything about before? Well, the US government owns a few airplanes which are Boeing E-4Bs. These are known as Advanced Airborne Command Posts. They're strategic command and control military aircrafts operated by the USAF, US Air Force. The E-4B is basically a mobile command post for the US government, mostly the President of the United States. Right now, the USA has 4 of these, and they're $350 million each. That means $1.4 billion has been spent on these doomsday planes. These planes are very low tech. In fact, there's no electronics on the planes whatsoever. The reason why the planes are all analog is in case of an EMP attack. An EMP going off would cause all electronics to not work. So that's why this aircraft is old school. The aircraft also has a built-in stair lift, as I don't think any stair lift operators will be around at the end of the world. It also has state-of-the-art direct fire countermeasures. This plane can pretty much survive any weather conditions, even a nuclear blast. It's also capable of housing a crew of 112 people, and you'd better hope that you're one of those people if the end of the world comes. The airplane can also carry airplane fuel and refuel while in the air. The plane can also be fully airborne for about 40 hours, which is enough to fly somewhere safe if a nuclear blast hits. The aircraft were actually built all the way back in 1973, but they still fly today and they've been upgraded heavily over the years. The aircraft is very large and has many decks. The flight deck has a station for the pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer. The middle deck, which is the most secure area, has a conference room. Inside it is a conference table which can sit 9 people. There's also a battle station where top military brass and the Secretary of Defense would be in the event of a nuclear attack. This is basically where they would plan their next military moves. There's also a large area for the crew to sleep in, as it can house over 100 crew members. On board, there's also 12,000 MREs. These are military ready-to-eat meals, because escaping an apocalypse can make you kind of hungry. The President will not sleep with the rest of the crew. Instead, they will be in the executive suite. This is likely where the Secretary of Defense and President will sleep. And believe it or not, there's also a press area on the plane. After all, who wouldn't want to read about the end of the world in the New York Times? But it's true, in the apocalypse, 17 journalists will be on board this airplane. They will be very carefully selected and from news-gathering organizations like Reuters and Associated Press. You may think this is kind of silly, but really it's pretty useful. After all, it's the only way citizens will get information from the president if the end of the world was to occur. There's also a very large communications center on board the aircraft. This plane is equipped with electronic communications, but also old-fashioned communications too. They have super high, high, low, and super low frequency radios. And when the plane is in flight, there's a 5-mile antenna sticking out behind this aircraft. This allows the plane to communicate using the most low-frequency radios possible. But you're probably looking at this plane and asking, what's with the bump? Well, this bump is actually a radome. Radomes are often seen outside military bases, and they're a lot bigger. Basically, its job is to conceal and protect antenna and satellites, which transmits communications. But where exactly are these planes located right now? Well, during times of great tension, for example the Cold War, they're stored at Andrews Air Force Base. But right now they're stored at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. But 24/7 around the clock, there's always at least one of these planes with a full crew ready to take off at any time. After all, you never know when the end of the world may come. Also, when the president travels outside the country, an E-4B will follow behind. However, for security reasons, they don't land at the same airport as Air Force One. E-4Bs are also used to transport the Secretary of Defense of the USA. Now, luckily an asteroid hasn't hit and we haven't had a nuclear war, so these planes have never been used for their true purpose. But should that ever happen, you can take rest in knowing that 112 people will be fine. I suggest you guys get some high up government jobs or become good journalists, and then you can survive the apocalypse. How a plane disappeared and landed 37 years later. The story begins on the 2nd of July 1955. It was a boom year in America and many people began flying on commercial airlines. Well, on that sunny summer's day, many people boarded Pan American Flight 914. It was supposed to be going a short distance on the east coast of the USA from New York to Miami, Florida. There were 4 crew members, including 2 flight attendants, a pilot and a co-pilot. And there were 57 passengers, men, women and children. The plane took off and all was fine. But 3 hours later, they were supposed to land in sunny Florida. But at the airport in Miami, there was no sign of this plane. The radars in the air traffic control tower in the Miami airport did not show the aircraft. They thought maybe it's just late for some reason, but there was no sign of it on the radar whatsoever. At first, they thought perhaps the plane had crashed, but there were no distress signals sent out. After they phoned the New York Air Traffic Control Tower, they finally worked out what had happened. Somehow, Flight 914 had disappeared from the radar altogether. The large airplane, which was a model DC-4, had simply vanished. The only thing people could think of was where the flight had gone over the Atlantic Ocean just for about 1 hour. They thought in that 1 hour perhaps the plane had fallen into the ocean and crashed. So they sent out search parties on sea and in the air, but they found nothing. Of course, everyone in the situation was freaked out. After all, there were 61 people on this airplane who may be in danger. Unfortunately, they could not crack the case of Flight 914, and eventually they put out a statement saying the plane had likely crashed, but they weren't sure where. But all of the dismayed relatives of the 61 people were enraged. They said this response was not good enough and they had to find this plane. And 37 years later, that's what happened. Nearly half a century later in 1992, it was a normal day in Caracas, Venezuela. The day was the 9th of September 1992. An air traffic controller at the airport in Caracas, Venezuela named Juan de la Corte was doing his job. But that's when something weird came up on his radar. A new plane seemed to appear out of nowhere on his radar. Juan and his colleagues checked other radars in the air traffic control room in case it was a mistake, but it was not. 10 minutes later, the aircraft was in view of Juan and his colleagues. They soon realized this was no normal plane from 1992. Instead, it was a twin-propeller DC-4 McDonnell Douglas. These airplanes were not used anymore and hadn't been used since the 60s. The pilot of the aircraft then said in English, "Where are we?" Juan then said, "You're about to land at Caracas Airport, Venezuela." The pilot then responded in a way that stunned Juan. He said, "This is Pan Am Flight 914 heading from New York to Miami, Florida. We have a crew of 4 and 57 passengers." At this point, Juan and his colleagues were so confused. Caracas, Venezuela is a totally different country and thousands of miles away from Miami or New York. Juan said, "When is your flight scheduled to land? We don't see you on our schedule." And that's when the pilot said, "Our flight is due to land at 9:55 a.m. on the 2nd of July 1955. When this was said, the entire air traffic control tower fell into an eerie silence. Juan de la Corte thought perhaps the pilot had gone insane. He said to the pilot, "Are you experiencing a disaster?" But there was no reply. That's when Juan realized his #1 priority was to try and land this plane to make sure everyone was safe. Remember, Juan knew that there were 57 passengers and 4 crew members who may be in danger. The plane landed and ground crew was scrambled to try and see what was going on. Juan then radioed to the pilot, "Do you realize that today is the 9th of September 1992? The pilot then could be heard heavily breathing and spluttered, "Oh my gosh." The ground crew were now getting near the plane, but that's when the pilot did something that Juan never expected. The pilot could be heard shouting not to come anywhere near the plane and that they were leaving. As the ground crew approached the plane, they saw the passengers looking out of the window. The pilot then started the plane's engine again and took off without saying another word. The Venezuelan civil aviation leaders then came together and confiscated all records relating to this weird event. They said they would investigate the event further, but nothing ever came of it. Since then, many theories have come together to try and make sense of what happened on that day. Some blame paranormal activity and others blame time travel. After the plane had taken off, it was never seen again on any radar or at any airport. So why on earth did this flight that was going from New York to Miami show up in Caracas, Venezuela? And why was it missing for 37 years before it re-landed in Venezuela only for it to take off again and then never be seen again? This event was first published in a newspaper named Weekly World News. And since then it's gone around the entire world as a bizarre story which no one can really explain. Now the story often spreads through word of mouth. And it's kind of become an urban legend as no one's really sure what exactly happened on that day. Could it have been a massive hallucination that happened at the Venezuelan airport? We may never know, as obviously we can't contact the crew members or the passengers of Flight 914. At 11 secrets airlines don't want you to know. Coming up first is the real reason you can't smoke on board. In the year 2000, the United States government banned smoking on any domestic and international flights. But airlines had already begun banning smoking on board since 1988. Usually companies are opposed to government regulations, so why do they do this voluntarily? After all, in 1988 when most US airlines banned smoking on board, people were not happy. Airlines said they did this for health reasons. They said that it could cause a danger of a fire on the plane and bring the plane down, despite the fact that there's no actual records of that happening. They also said that it's a danger to other smokers due to secondhand smoke. But let's be real, in the late 80s, people didn't really care about secondhand smoke. In fact, the real reason behind the ban was for cold hard cash. You see, the air on board aircrafts is constantly filtered. All of this air filtration helps to keep the air very fresh and clean. But if there's lots of resins and smoke from cigarettes in the air, this means the equipment has to work even harder. This causes the air filtration systems on board to wear out even quicker. And of course, that costs the airline a lot more money. They realize that people will still have to fly even if they can't smoke on board. So, surprise, surprise, corporations don't care about your health, but money instead. Next up is secret toilet button. Unless you're flying in business class, you won't get much privacy on an airplane. That is, unless you go into the lavatory on board, or so you thought. Most passengers do not know this, but the lavatory door can easily be opened from the outside, even if it's locked. On the door, there's a hidden switch. This will likely be underneath the no smoking or lavatory sign. Simply flip up this sign and there's a secret switch to unlock the door. Airline attendants are told to never use this in case someone's actually using the bathroom. But if someone's doing something dangerous or something they should not be doing in there, then it can be opened by staff. Or if someone is sick or falls unconscious inside, it can be opened. Next up is why turn off your cell phone. We're used to hearing before every flight, please turn off your cell phone or switch it to airplane mode. In a poll, 80% of people said they believed that's because it could cause a critical malfunction on the plane. But that's a total myth. The real reason you're asked to turn off your cell phone is because it can create static on the radio signal. This could interfere with the information pilots are trying to hear from the dispatcher in the radio control tower. But even aircraft crew admit to ignoring this rule a lot of the time. That's because the technology aircrafts and air control towers have nowadays is way better. Remember, they started asking passengers to do this on airplanes in the 90s. But obviously technology has come a long way and today it won't really interfere with anything if you leave your phone on during takeoff and landing. Next up we have runway numbers. If you're an observant flyer, you may have looked out of your window and seen something odd on the runway. That is, gigantic numbers painted in white. You may wonder, what exactly do these humongous numbers on the runways really mean? Many think it's simply labeling the runways, like 1, 2, 3, 4, but that's not the case. Instead, they indicate how many degrees the runway is from the magnetic north. This is rounded up to the tens to make it simpler to write on the ground. pilots can see which runway they're landing on from the sky, and then they know what grade to take inside the plane. So while these numbers may seem insignificant, they're the reason you hopefully get a smooth landing. Next up is door hand grips. Have you ever been on a plane and had to sit near the emergency doors? The emergency door looks kind of scary and complicated, but air stewardesses will likely tell you how to operate it if you're sitting next to it. But one thing they won't mention is why there's a hand grip on the door inside the plane. Well, the reason for this is in case of a panic on board the aircraft. In the event of an emergency, an attendant will open the emergency exit. However, panicked passengers can sometimes accidentally knock them down or even push them out of the aircraft. So they grab onto these handles so they stay upright and don't fall out of the aircraft or get pushed over by any scared passengers. These doors are often used in the event of an emergency landing, either on a road, a field, or on water. Next up, we have most common reasons luggage is lost. If you've ever had your luggage lost by an airline, you'll know it's about one of the most annoying things on planet Earth. It can be very hard to retrieve your luggage, especially if you're staying in a foreign country and don't know the area well. But what's even more difficult is getting a straight answer as to why it happened from the airline. Most of the time, they'll just lie to you and won't tell you the actual reason. But airline employees have detailed the most common reasons for luggage being lost. The most common reason is it's being held for additional checks and then was not loaded on time. This can sometimes happen if they think you have something suspicious in your bag. Sometimes a dopey employee can put the luggage on the wrong trolley and it flies to a totally different location. Sometimes an airline check-in employee can put the wrong sticker on the luggage, causing it to be sent elsewhere. Sometimes the suitcase can get stuck on the conveyor belt or go in the wrong direction. This frequently happens on connecting flights. Sometimes, as the trolley's being driven to the plane, the suitcase falls off and no one notices. Or sometimes the luggage recognition system makes an error and the label gets lost. That's why it's always good practice to put your name and contact info somewhere else on your luggage. Coming up next is luggage locks. You may be worried about losing your luggage and having someone else open it, but the most common reason people put locks on their luggage is to make sure the TSA don't go through it. But what airlines won't tell you is that locks don't protect luggage from being opened. People in the TSA have special lock picks where they can simply pick your lock and open it up. And many cheap baggage locks can simply be picked with a pen or pencil anyway. Sometimes this is done to check inside your bag and it can damage the lock and zip it in the process. When they're done, they'll simply put your lock back on your luggage and you'll be none the wiser. Next up, we have minor problems aren't fixed. If you're flying in an airplane, you'll want to make sure that everything has been checked very thoroughly, and even a minor problem hopefully has been fixed by the time you take off. But that's actually not always the case. Many minor failures on airplanes are not repaired immediately. The list of things that have to be checked before a flight takes off is humongous. But even if there are some minor failures on this list, the plane can still take off. That's because they say it doesn't affect the safety that much. And also it can be dealt with later to avoid flights being delayed. Don't worry though, every year there's less than 200 plane crashes. But that's with over 16 million flights every year. Next up, we have pilot meals. Airline food is not exactly great, but the captain and co-pilots still have to eat. That being said, they don't eat the same food. When the air stewardesses come around with the menus, the captain gets to pick his food first. Then the co-pilot has to have the alternative meal that the captain did not pick. The reason for this is in case the food is poisoned. If the captain and co-pilot both ate poisoned food and couldn't fly the plane, then the plane would go down. But if only one of them is poisoned, then the other one can take over and safely land the plane. However, this is not the case on all airlines, so make sure you get an airline that does this if you value safety. And finally, we have employee ticket prices. One major perk about being an airline employee is that you and your family have reduced price tickets. Many airlines provide their employees with very cheap or sometimes even free tickets for them, their kids, and their spouse. And this is not limited to just pilots. In fact, all crew on board get this perk, and also many people who don't work in the planes, for example check-in desk workers, also get this perk. So if you love to travel and want free airline tickets, then become an airline worker. Just be sure to let me know of any new secrets your airline doesn't want us to know. Mysterious airplanes that vanished forever. Coming up first, we have Flight 19 torpedoes. The date was the 5th of December 1945. Exactly 74 years ago to this date. WW2 was raging on and the US Navy was well involved. On the morning of that day, the US Navy dispatched 5 torpedo bombers. They were going on a routine training flight over the Bermuda Triangle. But shortly after they took off, they were never heard from again. After flying over the Bermuda Triangle, the planes just vanished from the radar. All 14 crew members aboard the flights were never heard from again. And there was no noise coming from their radios, nor were there any distress signals. A few hours later, the Navy sent out an additional 13 men on ships. But they too vanished and were never heard from or seen again. This was one of the first instances of things going missing around the Bermuda Triangle. Since then, many ships and planes have gone missing around the Bermuda Triangle area. But it is very creepy that these 5 planes and then this Navy ship totally vanished and were never seen again. To this day, it remains the #1 mystery of WW2. Next up, we have Amelia Earhart. Amelia Mary Earhart was an American aviation pioneer, and she was also the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. But on the 2nd of July 1937, a very mysterious thing happened to Amelia. She got into her Lockheed Electra 10E plane with her navigator named Fred Noonan. They took off from Lae, New Guinea, and they were set to complete one of the last stretches of their around-the-world flight. But as they were going over the Pacific Ocean, they totally disappeared. No wreckage or bodies were ever found of Amelia or Fred. A search lasted many weeks and cost $4 million. But absolutely nothing about the aircraft ever showed up. Some say this doesn't make any sense, as many planes who do fall into the Pacific Ocean are washed up eventually. But this flight remains a massive mystery, and to this day no one knows what happened to Amelia Earhart or her plane. Next up, we have Malaysia Airlines MH370. This is a modern aircraft which vanished out of thin air. This is said to be one of the world's greatest aviation mysteries. On the 8th of March 2014, the world was shaken when an airplane went missing. This flight was carrying 239 people. It was going a short distance from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia to Beijing, China. Some thought perhaps the plane went down near the southern Indian Ocean, but after spending many years scouring the seabed, nothing was found. No one knows what happened to the airplane or the people on it. And so far it's been over 5 years since the airplane was last seen. This year, some newspapers reported that the pilot may have wanted to take out everyone on the plane, and because of this, maybe he crashed the plane into the ocean. But as I say, there has been no wreckage, no bodies, and no sightings of this plane, so we just really don't know. Many people have put forward their theories and say that's the official stance, but they are all just that, theories. Next up is Lost F-35. The F-35 is a military jet made by Lockheed Martin. They are one of the fastest, most powerful fighter jets, and just one of these alone costs around $108 million. That's why in 2019, the world was stunned when an F-35 fighter jet from Japan went missing. A 41-year-old pilot named Akunori Hosomi was manning the plane, but following a rapid descent from a high altitude, the plane disappeared from the radar. The plane was going at speeds of around 700 miles per hour, 1,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. The Japanese Defense Ministry said it's likely that the pilot suffered from vertigo being so high up in the air. But that doesn't really explain why the plane went off the radar. The plane sent no distress signals and the pilot did not try and eject. The fighter jet would have also had proximity sensors sounding an alarm, but the pilot did nothing. After a few days, Japan called off the search for the missing fighter jet. They concluded that the most likely scenario is it crashed into the Pacific Ocean, but really they're just not sure. The pilot was very experienced and had over 3,200 flight hours. But it's not known why this $100 million aircraft dropped off all radars and then was never seen again. Next up is Stardust. One day, British South American Airways plane Stardust was flying from Buenos Aires to Santiago. This happened on the 2nd of August 1947. It took off from Buenos Aires, but it never made it to its destination. Instead, it completely lost contact going over the Andes Mountains. Some say the plane could have malfunctioned and crashed into a mountain, while others think there may have been foul play and they're not sure what happened to Stardust. It was a very famous and beloved plane, but it has not been seen for 50 years. They've tried to find plane wreckage and bodies in the Andes Mountains, but haven't found anything yet. And to this day, Stardust remains a mystery. Next up is Flying Tiger 739. This flight took place in 1962 during the Vietnam War. The US Army Flying Tiger Flight 739 was going from Guam to the Philippines. But it lost contact over the Pacific Ocean. However, the plane wasn't just going over any part of the Pacific Ocean, it was going over the Mariana Trench. The Mariana Trench is known as the most deep and mysterious part of the entire world. It's literally as low down as you can go in the world. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, you can't see anything in its pitch blackness. But it's said that many unknown creatures live down there, including the ancient megalodon. No distress calls were received from Flying Tiger Flight 739. And despite a massive search involving 1,400 people and 50 aircraft, no one was found. 8 boats also covered a surface area of 144,000 square miles. But no remains of Flying Tiger Flight 739 were ever found. What do you think? Was it to do with the Marianas Trench? I think it was. Next up is Indian Air Force. India is a massive country and they have a very strong air force. But in July of 2016, a mysterious thing happened to an Antonov AN-32 aircraft. This turboprop transport aircraft of the Indian Air Force disappeared with 29 people on board. It was flying over the Bay of Bengal and was en route to an Air Force base in Port Blair. The search and rescue mission quickly became the largest in the history of India. It involved many aircrafts, surface vessels, and submarines. But after a few months of searching in September, the mission was called off. No trace of the Antonov AN-32 or the 29 people on board was ever found. And so far they have no idea what happened to this plane. And finally on the list, we have Vancouver Douglas DC-4. In 1951, the Douglas DC-4 departed from Vancouver, Canada. It was going to stop at Anchorage Airport in Alaska. And during the flight, weather conditions were very bad and the visibility was only 500 feet. Because of this, the pilot signaled an emergency warning. But they reported it way too late and nothing could be done. Then, all of a sudden, the airplane disappeared from all radars. Since then, no trace of the aircraft has ever been found. This is very mysterious, as it was not flying over water, so it didn't go underwater. If it crashed, it must be above ground, but no wreckage was found anywhere. So, what do you think happened to Vancouver Douglas DC-4? Wow, this video was mysterious and also kind of scary. If you want some more amazing videos, then check out my second channel. There'll be a link to that on screen in a moment. But as always, thanks for watching. Check out some more videos on screen right now. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and if you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to Top 10s.